This podcast was made possible by the Office of Communications for the Catholic Diocese of Arlington, which is funded in part by the Bishop's Lenten Appeal and the Catholic Communication Campaign. We thank all who support these critical appeals and the ministries they fund. You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, Mary Lenaburg talks about losing her 22-year-old daughter, Courtney, to a horrific disease that developed at 5 weeks old and was characterized by seizures and resulted in many permanent physical limitations.
The brain goes wonky, the hands curl in, the legs curl in, the whole body begins to pulsate, their eyes roll back in their head, they begin to foam at the mouth, they would release their bowels, release their bladder. She would do that about 10 to 15 times a day for the remainder of her life.
2 years after Courtney's death, Mary has a ministry in which she encourages people to embrace the story God is writing with their lives and to trust wherever the path leads. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese.
Mary, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Billy. It's a delight to be with you.
Well, you too. And since, seeing that the book was put out and digging into a lot of your story, and I knew some of your story before, but there's a lot here that was very new to me. Before we kind of go into it, and I'm really looking forward to going there, did you grow up in the faith? Because you're obviously a very faithful person now, and you've written so much about it. Is that something that was always a part of your life?
It was. I'm a cradle Catholic. I grew up in the Archdiocese of Washington at the Shrine of St. Jude. I'm one of 8, and I remember my mom making monthly confession on the first Saturday of the month. So I remember that kind of those habits were instilled in me from a very young age. I went to Catholic school for the first 8 years of my life, although most of my junior high years were spent in detention. So I wasn't the best student, but they were very good. They were, we prayed every morning, they prayed the Angelus at noon. I didn't bring all of that into my adulthood. I certainly sort of strayed away from it for a while, but it's always been there. And I appreciate the fact that my parents kind of really instilled that in us, because in times of crisis, that's where I go. I go to those places that you remember from your childhood. And
your husband's such a close part of your story and your walk and everything, obviously. Did he grow up kind of the same way?
He did not. He grew up as a Lutheran, very good Lutheran, in a strong Lutheran family in Oklahoma. And he came into the faith when we had been married for 11 years. And it's a beautiful story. Our son was 9 at the time, and he had received communion, and Daddy didn't receive communion. So we were there in the pew, Courtney in her chair at the end of the pew, and then Jonathan. And as we were walking out to the parking lot, Jonathan said, "Dad, why don't you receive communion?" And Jerry, of course, was, "Well, I'm a Lutheran, and we don't believe that is really Jesus Christ." And Jonathan sort of stopped and said, "Well, that's stupid. That's Jesus. Why don't you want to receive him?" And my husband is a historian, so he was kind of trying to answer the question for the 9-year-old. And finally, Jonathan put his hands on his hips and he goes, "Dad, it's been around for 2,000 years. You really can't argue with that." And got in the car. And so Jerry, 2 weeks later, started RCIA. That was kind of like his final push.
That's wild.
So you just let the children lead them and stay out of the way, and God does what he needs to do. So he's been in the church for 20 years now.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So how old was Jonathan when he came into the church, your son? Jonathan
came in, he was baptized as a baby.
No, but I'm saying your husband. How old was Jonathan?
Oh, my husband. Jerry. Jerry was, it was 1999, so he was in his 30s.
Okay. And how old was Jonathan?
Jonathan at that time was 9.
Oh, okay. So he was younger. See, my mom, we were kind of a similar story with my mom, but I was 16 at the time. So I was just kind of curious with Jonathan,
No, Jonathan's very bold and
I was going to say, I was 16 and still not that bold.
Yeah,
I was pretty obnoxious and arrogant. So
he kind of called it like he saw it. And I just kept my mouth shut. I was just kind of putting Courtney in the car. I'm like, "All right, Lord, this is yours. Whatever is happening here.
God can work through a 9-year-old.
Exactly. So,
Now, Jerry's got a hilarious Instagram, but one of the funniest things I've ever seen on Instagram are the cheesy Hallmark movie reviews that you and Jerry will do on your Instagram. They're so funny. And they're so cute because you guys are such a great couple.
Well, thank you. Yes, he's really excited because Hallmark has doubled their Christmas movies for this year, and they begin right after Halloween. So I have informed him that we need to find like turkey pajamas for the Thanksgiving ones. And then we've got to up our grading system because we were doing it by snowflakes or Christmas trees. Right. And there was this one that we actually just gave one twig to. I mean, it was so bad. But what I love about it is Jerry comes from he's very caustic. He's like Eeyore to my Tigger. Yeah. So I love the cheesy romance. And he's sitting here just looking at it going, that's not possible. Yeah. Like you can't, that's not real. And the way he describes, how he would like to march through the town and set it right. It's just a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun with it. So
they're so good. And I think, every guy that has to sit through those movies should follow your Instagram, if for nothing else, to just feel some camaraderie with Jerry being dragged through these.
True. It's 31 years of marriage. He would never have done this at year 10. Never. Right. So, but I've watched a lot of John Wayne and a lot of Band of Brothers in the Pacific, As I said, I've earned my Hallmark movies. So yeah, it's fun.
Now, your kids, you have talked about your kids.
I have, we were blessed with 4 souls, 2 we didn't get to hold here that are waiting for us. And then our son, Jonathan, will be 30 in November. And then our daughter, Courtney, was 22 when God called her home. So we were blessed with 2 amazing, amazing children. But Courtney was the sunshine of our home, the heart of our home. And she really showed us the face of Christ. She really taught us how to love and how to love with our whole lives, love deeply, love completely, because there was nothing Courtney could do. She was profoundly disabled. She didn't walk, she didn't talk, she didn't speak. Although she did speak, but she didn't speak English. She spoke Courtneyese, which sounds a lot like Chewbacca from Star Wars. Yeah. So she just was Courtney, unique, beautiful, made in the image and likeness of God in complete perfection, because God doesn't make mistakes. So he doesn't make junk. And he makes beauty. And so she really just kept leading us to Christ. As we dealt with all of her medical situations, she just bared it all beautifully. Yeah. And she took 2 parents who were quite broken and stuck in their own places. And she was like our earthquake. If you think of an asphalt street, newly paved, beautiful, no divots, the trees are lined up, all of the gardening is done, and you're driving down the road and an earthquake happens. And then the asphalt breaks and the water main breaks and the sewage main breaks and it all bubbles to the surface. Well, Courtney was our earthquake. And so all the stuff that we had put aside in our lives, all the stuff that we had suppressed and pushed down, we had to deal with it because you were in crisis. And when you're in crisis, all the stuff that you don't want to deal with, you have to deal with in order to get through the crisis. So that's what she did for us. And she is a saint now in heaven, and she intercedes for us every single day. And we are incredibly blessed. So
how was she born disabled?
No,
or how
she
did
was
this
5
happen?
weeks old when she had her first seizure. Her first seizure happened on the day of her baptism. We like to joke that the Holy Spirit seriously imbued her and, just shook it all up. Physiological effect. We actually left the church from her baptism and went straight to the hospital. She had 3 grand mal seizures. Her first one was as the water was being poured. We thought she was just kind of shaking from the water being cold, and she was agitated. Wow. The second one got worse and her body was more involved. By the third, she was fully involved in a grand mal seizure. And we literally got in the car, drove down the road, and ended up at Bethesda Naval Hospital. My husband was active duty military at the time, so that's where we ended up.
What branch?
He served as a P3 navigator for the United States Navy. He's a Naval Academy graduate, class of 87.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So what is a grand mal seizure?
A grand mal seizure is kind of when, if you think of, we're going to stick with the earthquake, all right, or volcano.
I'm with you.
If you think the brain is a nice, even sort of wave, and then a volcano erupts in the electrical part of the brain, right? So the brain goes wonky, the hands curl in, the legs curl in, the whole body begins to pulsate. Their eyes roll back in their head. They begin to foam at the mouth. They would release their bowels, release their bladder, just, the whole body just kind of looks like an earthquake. And so she would do that, on average, I would say about 10 to 15 times a day for the remainder of her life. No matter the medication, no matter the therapy, we never found a reason for her seizures, which is, I think, it's hard for people not to have a diagnosis when their child is so ill. But for us, it was just sort of God saying, trust me with all of it. Her official diagnosis was seizure disorder unknown with global developmental delay.
So did the seizures cause the disability, or did the disability cause the seizures?
Actually, the majority of her disability came from a medication we gave her when she was 7 months old to try and stop the seizures. And unfortunately, she was allergic to the medication. So her brain swelled, her kidneys shut down, and she almost died. And so she stayed at 6 to 7 months in development because of that medication. So a lot of people think, oh my gosh, these seizures were causing all this damage. Well, they were. They were causing their own damage, and we couldn't control them. And the medication we were giving her just to try and control them was hard for her to take. But really, the majority of her damage came from us agreeing to give a medication. So we had to kind of work our way through that whole idea of we did this to our child. And God was very good in that.
Well, but you did it obviously not thinking that there was this
Correct.
enormous risk. So,
Correct.
But how did you spiritually, emotionally, how did you grapple with that as time went on? And obviously the condition gets
Right.
worse, and it's
Right.
harder as they get older and stuff to kind of manage these
We didn't
symptoms.
grapple well in the beginning. There was a whole lot of, God, I hate you. How could you do this? You know, you gave us this answer and now it's not the answer. It made it worse. Again, that earthquake of Courtney, you have to deal with all the things. My husband and I had entered into marriage with a lot of wounds from our not our childhood, but just our young adulthood. It was revealed about 5-6 years into our marriage, my husband had an addiction to pornography. That's how he dealt with all of the emotional baggage. Myself, I had an addiction to food. And so we had to kind of take a hard look at ourselves, a hard look at our marriage, and a hard look at our family, and really just kind of begin to give it over to God. It was a very difficult time. I didn't know if our family could withstand it until we went to Lourdes in 2000. And that experience in Lourdes changed everything for us. We had already begun to work on our individual issues. Jerry had gotten a mentor. There was no therapy at that time. You're talking, before 2000, for men that were struggling with this addiction. But he found a good mentor. He found a men's group, accountability, and began to work through that process of letting go and healing, allowing God to heal that addiction. It took about 12 years, and we live in freedom to this day. So I praise God for that miracle. And for myself, it took about 7. And so, getting therapy, we had marriage counseling, we had individual therapy. We both had spiritual directors, went to confession. There were times we went to confession once a week as you're cleaning out that attic, as you're dealing with all the things. Unfortunately for our son, because you're dealing with a child in crisis all the time, he was sort of set aside, which happens very, very often when you have siblings that are able-bodied, with siblings that are not. And so he kind of bubbled and did his own thing, and we got him help as needed. And then when he was in college, he sort of had his moment of breaking. And he came home after 3 semesters of college, and we very angry. And so we got him help, and he entered therapy for about 4 years, and he was diagnosed with depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and survivor's guilt, because he felt as the stronger sibling, it should have been him that took this on.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot. It's a lot, Billy. It's a lot.
You're making this easy on me. But let's back up, and so you and your husband were both kind of experiencing your own struggles.
Correct.
That were probably really triggered by, but not necessarily caused by the situation.
We brought these into our marriage, but triggered indeed.
So how do you go through the fire of having a child with a severe disability? I mean, every hour there is just a ton of work, I'm sure, involved in caring for her. And I was blessed to see it firsthand how well you two cared for her. But how do you go through the pain and the struggle of healing yourself while trying to, manage this data? It's not like you could go on retreat for, take a sabbatical and be like, listen, we're going to come back in a year and we're going to be much better. Right. See you in a little while. No,
that
you can't do
that.
That.
So good though, doesn't it?
It does sound good.
Can we do that? No, it's basically baptism by fire. I think of the scripture in Sirach where it's gold is tested by fire.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was kind of a letting go of little things, one thing at a time. What was this one thing this day? I really entered into that idea of offering it up, of redemptive suffering. Courtney lived redemptive suffering. She lived it with her whole life, and she taught her parents and her brother how to enter into it and enter into it well. Now, What does that look like on a daily basis? That means when you feel like you're triggered to go and make 5 pans of brownies and eat them, that you might make 3 and you're going to give away 2.5 and have 1 brownie. And that takes a lot of guts to do that when food is what has been helping you to deal. But what food did for me was just suppress it. It just made it harder. It just added more guilt. And so as you were going through therapy, you're able to walk through the guilt as to why. What was the why behind these things? And what Jerry and I discovered is we both felt unworthy of love. There were things that had happened in our childhood and in our young adulthood that we just didn't feel like we were ever going to be good enough.
Yeah.
And so once you identify the why, the underlying issue, and you start attacking that both spiritually and with counseling, amazing things happen. You have to remember that our souls have a door. In my mind, that's probably not, catechically correct, but they have a door in my mind, and there's one handle, and it's on the inside. And we have to be the ones to open that door. But if you just open it a little bit with that ray of light, then you ask God in, because he's the divine physician. He's the divine healer. And it didn't matter what chaos was happening in our life once we understood that. And it came very slowly and very painfully. There comes a point where you literally are on the ground. Like I was literally on the ground, and it was in a bathroom in our home in Maryland at the time. And I just looked at him and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't carry your guilt and my guilt. And Courtney's, her whole life was a physical. My physicality became part of her life. I carried her. I held her. She had a G-tube. I fed her. She had a suction machine. It was very physically demanding to care for her 24 hours a day. And I said, I just couldn't do it anymore. And praise God, in that moment, the Holy Spirit was fully present. And I told Jerry he had to make a choice. He could either choose his addiction or he could choose us. And by the grace of God, in that moment, he just made a choice. You only have to be brave for 10 seconds. And he said, but I love you and I choose you. Now, that did not make the next 7 years any easier.
Yeah.
But in that 10 minutes of bravery, which is why the book is called Be Brave and the Scared, God walked in and he said, okay, I got this. Now you got to give me some more. And that's what it's like. God asks us into a deeper and deeper relationship with him, and we have to let go of these things. Now, I'm not saying you don't forget. I don't forget anything that happened in the past. I forget nothing. But I don't feel any pain from it, and I don't feel any weight from it because I've let it go and I've given it to the Lord to redeem, restore, and heal. But I remember it so I don't repeat it.
Yeah.
And that's a gift. And Courtney was all part of that. It's because I was so tired physically, mentally, and emotionally that I had that moment of breaking, and God was able to come in. So we all have those, whether you're on the floor in a bathroom or whether you're sitting in traffic and you got a diagnosis or you heard bad news and you just can't take it anymore. We all have those moments. And so in that moment of breaking, that's where God shows up in a huge way. And he did. You've
mentioned the importance of counseling a couple of times. I was just talking to my wife about this last night, how good it is that we live in a culture now where it's not taboo to go to psychotherapy or counseling or whatever it is. How did you find a good one? Because some people we get calls pretty regularly actually to Catholic Charities, and they might have been recommended something that was really bad. I was thinking about, you're talking about your husband's addiction to pornography. Yeah. Well, the 90s were kind of a window where it was seen as like a healthy outlet for men. Like this is a way to avoid being inappropriate in other ways and stuff. But I remember hearing those kinds of things, and it was on its face to people of faith nonsense. But some people get trapped up in it. It's kind of easy to. So, and those were sometimes counselors saying those things. So how did you guys find good ones that really helped kind of walk you through?
Well, when you surround yourself with good Catholic people, so God surrounded us with good Catholic people. At that time, we were at my home parish in the Shrine of St. Jude. Jerry was still active duty in D.C. doing his shore tour in D.C. And so I asked my friends that were in small group. I didn't ask my parents because that was just its whole another situation. But I asked my parish priest, and he didn't know. And of course, everybody always goes to Catholic Charities first, which is great. But we didn't have, even Catholic Charities back then did not have a lot. So what happened about the year, I think it was 1999, we met a couple here we had come out of the Navy, and we met a couple here in Arlington.
That's great.
And they have walked with us for 20 years, and they are well known in this diocese.
Yeah.
The good deacon and his wife, Christine, and they took our hands, and he had resources. He had a degree in counseling.
Yeah.
So he gave us.
And that's how I met you, was through them.
That's correct. Yeah. And he gave us, they were the light of Christ to us.
In the early days, when she's having these seizures and it's failing, let's say like the first 2 or 3 years, because it kind of built for you and things got worse. What was your prayer life like then?
A crisis prayer.
Okay.
Jesus, get me through the next 30 seconds.
Yeah.
When Courtney would have a seizure, I'd start saying the Hail Mary, because it's the one prayer in a crisis that I've learned that I've never forgotten. Like sometimes I'll forget words in a crisis to the Our Father, or I'll forget the Memorare, but the good nuns made sure I knew that Hail Mary. And so I would just say it again and again and again. And the Divine Mercy Chaplet became a true gift to us, because we called it Courtney's Novena, the Divine Mercy Novena. Anytime we had a question, anytime a big decision was coming, anytime a big crisis was happening financially, medically, we would say that novena, and God would just seriously bust open the door and bring us people. We'd get a phone call, we'd get a letter, a doctor would call and say, well, let's do this test, or this is a medication. I mean, it's just amazing what that did for us. So Jesus, I trust in you, comes in clutch all the time.
Yeah.
And you have to let it go. Like I literally was like, Lord, whatever happens now, there were many times when Courtney would stop breathing during a seizure, and my prayer would be, if this is the moment that you bring her home to you, thank you that she is with me. I will hold her as she does this, but give me the strength to be able to stand up again.
What was the expectation like for how long she would live?
Well, that's funny, because there wasn't one. Nobody knew why she was having seizures, and her whole brain seized at the same time. It wasn't a focal point anywhere in the brain. So the doctors were just confounded. First they said a year, then they said 3, then they said 5, and then they stopped talking.
Yeah.
So when we got to 22,
there's a point where you just stop being wrong.
Exactly. They're like, we're not even good.
Up,
we don't even know. But when she passed away at 22, we had a beautiful Catholic neurologist at Georgetown University Hospital. His name was Cesar Santos, Dr. Santos, and he walked with us for 10 years. And I remember the last appointment with him, because she was no longer processing food well, and her kidneys were under stress, and her liver was under stress. Her body was tired.
Yeah.
She was just tired. She was tired. And I had asked God a long time ago that when that time came, it would be like a sign on the side of the road, the glitter, and it would say, it's time, Mary, it's time.
Yeah.
Time is short, hold her close. And not that I didn't hold her close, but when you're doing all the things of the things, you forget sometimes that this could be the end.
I can see that.
So I remember our last visit with him, and he just held her hand and just thanked her for teaching him so many lessons on faith and on perseverance. And I remember he kissed her forehead, and she smiled. And he just looked at me and he said, I am in the presence of a living saint. And I've known it for a long time. And so he thanked us, for being so open about our faith, and for loving our daughter so boldly and beautifully out in the open of the world. We lived outside. You met her. We brought her everywhere we went. She was at Mass every Sunday. She was at the May crowning. She was in the mall. She was everywhere. And she drew people to her. There was a joy and a peace about her. When she would smile, everyone would stop. When she would laugh, it was like the Oscars were going on, and you're just standing there in awe of her. She brought things down to simplicity, to a very simple level. We take for granted our healthy bodies. We take for granted all that we are able to do. And when you're around a child that can do none of that, she reminds you very quickly of the Father's love. Courtney couldn't do anything to earn my love. She couldn't do a thing. She wasn't going to be a ballerina, a scholar. There was nothing she could do to make me go, oh, that's awesome. I love you. She was Courtney. And that is how the Father loves us. I loved her freely, fully, and with my whole life. I would die for her. And what she showed us was that's how the Father feels about us. There's nothing we can do to earn his love. There is nothing we can do that's going to make him less proud of us. We are not ever going to get kicked out of the family, the family of God. He is God the Father. Yeah. And he loves fully, freely, completely. And he asks you to love that way in his name. And that's what we tried to do. So that last visit really was more for me to see the impact of my child's life on other people. And that whole office came in to say goodbye. You know, we got the great privilege of having 3 months with her as this process happened with her body. And it was the most beautiful 3 months, and we poured ourselves into her, and our door was open, and whoever wished to be with her, pray with her, ask her for prayers, you know, just to be in her presence was welcome. Complete strangers came to our home just to pray with her.
How did she go? How did it
She
end?
passed away by simply exhaling. It was the most beautiful death I could have imagined. I was holding her. It was December 27th, 2014. It's the Feast of St. John the Beloved, God's beloved one, the one that placed his head on his heart. And that's where Courtney was all the time. We would curl up into a chair and her head would be over my heart. And the most calming thing for her from when she was a little girl was my heartbeat. It would calm her right down. She'd just put her head there and she'd sigh and smile and everything would be good. And so I had asked God a long time ago that when she took her last breath, that I would be with her as I was with her when she took her first. And he gave me that. He gave me that gift. And I was in her bed and holding her, and she just simply exhaled with a smile on her face and went home to the Lord.
So I asked you what your prayer life was like in the early days when you were struggling with it. What is your prayer life like now that she's with God?
Yeah.
So your life is very different. Your obligations are very different. Your opportunities are different. Being able to tell this story. You were kind of living the story with Courtney for those years. What is it like now?
It's intense. It's intense. It's just as intense as it was when she was alive, but it's a different type of intensity. Now, there is freedom. And in the beginning, I didn't know what to do with it. Literally, she took her last breath and my life changed completely. She went home to the Lord. She went running right into his arms. And I know she is just doing his work and doing it so beautifully now. But I looked around and I didn't know what to do. Like my whole life had been caring for her. And literally in a breath, I had no job. Like I had to really search for what is my purpose now, Lord? What do you want me to do? I don't know what to do with my days. Now, at the first 3 months, I don't really remember anything. I was deep, deep in grief. I think I probably just sat on the sofa and cried every single day. I didn't have any reason to get up again. And then God brought 2 little girls into my life, and I sort of became a nanny for about 9 months, and I loved on them, and it was beautiful. And he knew that I needed little people. He knew I needed children to care for, because that's my whole identity had been wrapped up in caring for Courtney and for Jonathan and for Jerry. And what I came to learn in those 9 months is that my identity stands outside that. That is just what he's asking me to do. That is not who I am.
It's such a hard struggle.
It is.
Anyone that loses a job,
yeah,
which in the grand scheme is fairly trivial.
Yes.
It's important to have a job, but it's not like losing a child or anything like that. So when your identity, even as a parent, isn't your real identity, I don't know how to process that. I'm a dad. How would I imagine myself as a human without my children?
Yeah.
How do you figure that out?
The greatest gift that God gave me was to understand my children don't belong to me. Your children don't belong to you. God has no grandchildren. They are his. And they are his alone. And he has given them to you for a time to love them and to form them and to introduce them to him. But they belong to him. And when he decides to allow that time to come, whether it be in infancy and childhood, as a teenager, young adult, and whatever it is that they are given, that struggle that they are given, whether it be cancer or addiction or a car accident. I mean, whatever it is, we have to understand that God stands outside of time. He sees the whole plan. We see our one lane of traffic. So I didn't know what to do. God showed me what to do because he gave me people. He gave me a platform. I've been blogging for 10 years by the time Courtney had passed away. And he brought people to me that were hurting. My charism is wisdom and mercy. And that's when I learned what it was. And wisdom is I'm not afraid of your mess. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know how hard it is, but I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to pray. So my prayer life has quadrupled times 10 billion. I spend time in adoration. I try at least once a week, especially when I'm traveling, it becomes more challenging, but, I go to confession sometimes once a week, sometimes every other week, mostly regularly once a month. You got to clean out that attic in order to hear the still small voice. You can't hear it through all the junk. So you got to get to use the sacraments that the church has provided for us. And I listen and I serve. And right now I've written a book. I am now speaking with people. But what I've learned is I can stand on a stage and speak to 300, 400, 1,000 women, or a mixed audience, whatever the Lord has brought before me. But that's not where the ministry happens. The ministry happens in the corner of that room when a mama comes up to you and says, my baby died of trisomy 18, and I really hate God right now. What do you do? Well, you love. The answer to every question is to love. And to love, like Mother Teresa says, sometimes we love and we love until it hurts, and we continue to love. And then we find that there is nothing left but love. Because that's what God did for us on the cross. That's what Jesus Christ did for us on the cross. He loved us with his very life. And so we're going to face hard times. We're going to go through hard things. But when we trust him with the plan and we take our hands off of it and we say, it is yours, drive it, show me what to do. And everybody's like, what does that look like, Mary? Literally, it might be a phone call that says, Mary, I'm having a really hard time. I've got 6 kids and it's going nuts. My husband is traveling. Is there any way that you can watch 4 of them while I go to the doctor with the other 2? Absolutely. Let me serve you in that way. Let me love you in that way. It could be a conversation in one of those conferences. Absolutely. Tell me about your child. Because you see, when you lose a child, the first thing that goes is nobody wants to talk about them. They don't want to ask you about them because they don't want to hurt you. So the thing that I say to everyone when they have lost someone or they know someone who has lost someone, allow them to tell you about them. Allow them to talk freely about, remember when we were at this picnic and they did this, or remember when she laughed at this, or remember when, the places where I feel most comfortable and I'm most free are around people that allow me to talk about Courtney as if she's standing right next to me.
So I think most people would think if it's a nice moment, they're a buzzkill, and that moment is like, oh, thanks for bringing up the source of their pain.
Not for me.
When for the but I think for a lot of people, it's the same way. It's if they're grieving, this nice moment is kind of a facade for the grief. It's like they're just masking over what they're really thinking about, which is the person they just lost. And by giving them an opportunity to talk about it, you're liberating them to show off what they're thinking about, show off this beautiful gift that they were given for however long it was that person was in their life.
Well, see, I think of grief as a climbing rose bush. Okay, so you have this pillar and the rose bush is climbing and climbing until it completely surrounds you and it becomes part of who you are. Grief is in my journey. I grieve every day. I might hear a song on a radio that I sang to her or that she loved, and I'll just start crying. Like in the Wegmans parking lot, I am bawling. And I take that moment and I allow that moment to happen. And then I, blow my nose and I get to the business of living my life. Yeah. But grief is part of my story. Whenever I walk into church, one of my favorite hymns is, Beyond All Praising. And that was the hymn that we walked our daughter out of that church to the graveyard to. So every time I hear that, I am transported back to that moment in her funeral. And I literally lift my hands in praise because he is a God beyond all praising. We are an Easter people. We go to the foot of the cross and we walk through the cross to get to Easter Sunday. But we are to live in the promise and the hope of a future of a loving and beautiful God who is merciful and kind and forgiving and redeeming and restoring. So whatever it is that's in your life, my loss of my daughter is just part of my story. It doesn't define me. It doesn't, that's not where I stay. Many people choose to stay in that grief because they're afraid to live a life outside of it. They don't know what to do. And so they're familiar with the grief, and so they sit there. And that's, to me, it's sad. I understand it because I did it myself for a while. But God is calling us out of that. He is calling us out of the grief of the grave and into the joy and the hope of Easter Sunday, where one day, God willing, please Lord, open the gates, let me in. I get to hold my daughter again.
Yeah.
I have conversations with the Lord sometimes where I'm like, so when I get there, I see you and you're good, but can I hug her first?
Yeah.
And I used to feel guilty about that. And one time when I was in adoration, he just sort of spoke to my heart and he's like, Mary, I gave you the love for that child. Don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Because in loving her, you loved me. In caring for her, you cared for me.
And the love you had for her is so unique. Going back to what you said a little bit ago, is that she couldn't earn it. She couldn't have accomplished something that made you love her more. The paradox of Courtney, in some sense, is she required so much of you that if I was to describe the situation, it would sound just totally exhausting, and it was. But it was a unique opportunity to love in a way that no other child would have ever given you that opportunity to do. That's very, very unique.
Well, she was made for me. See, our children are made for us. Our spouses are made for us. We are meant to walk together in sanctification. Jerry sanctifies me every darn day of my life. And I have no doubt that I sanctify him as well. Sometimes, confession is required.
That's the trade.
That's the trade. But our children are made for us. Jonathan was made for me. That boy he's a man, but challenges me every day, challenges me to let go of my judgment, of my sense of control. I'm a kind of a recovering perfectionist and control freak, but our children were made for us. There is something in them that is divine, just like us. There's a divine, as Pope Francis says, there's a divine spark in all of us, but that is made to bring Christ to us. I used to say, how interesting is it that I needed a Courtney and all that went with her for me to see God? Talk about a stiff-necked people. I was that off the, no, he gave her to me so I would learn to love. Yeah. And I would take my hands off everything.
You and I share that Irish stubbornness.
Yes.
It takes dramatic events to do it. You mentioned that you look forward to, being in heaven and being able to hug her.
Yeah.
What do you say to her?
Oh, I don't think there's anything to say. I think it's all been said and she knows it. Yeah. She stays with me. She's with me here now in my heart. I never left her. She never left me. The best thing for me, the most precious time for me is at Mass, because wherever God is, the saints and angels and the holy men and women are there praising. So I know every time I go to Mass, every time I go to adoration, my daughter stands behind the veil. It's the closest place I can come to her. And so I come now with a whole new appreciation of the liturgy, with a whole new appreciation of how we are taken up into heaven at the epiclesis. It was Courtney's favorite part of the Mass because she'd hear the bells. And whenever she heard the bells for the first time, she would lift her head, smile, and laugh. And she knew who was coming. It was like the doorbell saying, I'm here. I'm right here with you, Court, because she had no sin that blocked her communication with the Lord. So could you imagine what her life was like in her mind? Yeah. She was like, okay, Jesus, what are we doing today? Well, Courtney, you're going to do this, this, and this. And she was just infused with him. Yeah. And so that's why people were drawn to her. And so now I want to be her. Yeah. I want to let go.
That innocence of a child.
I want to trust him with everything I have. And I'm learning. I'm still learning. I'm not there yet. But, that's the constant process it is of being human.
You talked earlier about the how you and Jerry, your relationship had to, you had to grow closer, and it took a lot to do that. But especially early when the challenges with Courtney were new and tough. What did you all, after she died, how did you all kind of grieve together so that you're not kind of on these little islands of grief, which happens a lot when people lose children? They kind of
there's going to be the islands. Apart. Let's put it that way. The islands will exist, and this is why. I am a woman, and I am her mother. He is a man. He was her father. Our relationship with our daughter was different. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. He likes to say, Mary, I cannot understand fully and completely what you went through. I did not hold her in my body. I did not give birth to her. I loved her. I cared for her. I held her. She was my sunshine. She was my pickle. He used to call her a pickle because you can be a sour pickle or a sweet pickle depending on the day. So he goes, I loved her, but I left the house every day and I went to work and I provided for the family, and then I would come in, so he came in and out. Yeah. I never left. So my grief was different than his. Mine was much more intense. I'm a more intense human than he is. He's able to compartmentalize things. But I have to say the most beautiful thing in the restoration and redemption of our marriage has been to be able, like when we go to her graveside and you stand there and he has tears running down his face and you just put your arms around him and I have tears, and we look at this beautiful tombstone that has her scripture on it, Jeremiah 29:11. I am not here to harm you. I'm here to give you a future with hope, because that's who she was to us. She was our hope. Our son is our hope. You know, they are the next generation. They are the hope and the future of the church. They're the hope of our heart and our family. So to be able to cry together for a Navy man, that does not come easily. And he's pretty much 3/4 German. So you add that in and you're just, you know, when that crack happens. And when it did for him was the day after she died. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. We had slept maybe 2 hours. Her body had been removed around 3. And we knew we had to be at the funeral home the next morning to make all the final arrangements. And all of her monitors were on. She had several monitors in her room. She had a seizure monitor and like a baby monitor and they were all still on. We just hadn't turned them off. And I was upstairs and I heard this sort of sound, this guttural sound. And I didn't remember that she was gone. I run downstairs thinking she's having a seizure, and my husband is standing in front of her bed. And of course the bed is empty, and he's holding her medication in his hands. And because it's 6 o'clock in the morning, at 6 o'clock at night, he gave her the meds, his job. And so he's standing next to the bed and he's weeping, and he holds the medication out to me and he says, "What do I do? She's not here. What do I do?" And he just broke. He broke. And to be able to stand by the man that you love, by the man that you've wounded, by the man that has wounded you, but yet God has worked in that, and he has redeemed it and restored it. And it is possible. I promise any couple out there that is going through a difficult time, don't quit. Now, I understand there are situations in which, yes, quit, go, abuse and other things, but hard things are going to happen, and your heart is going to break. And his did. His girl was gone. And there would never be a wedding. There would never be grandbabies. There would never be those moments.
Yeah.
We had to let all of that go for her and for us.
Yeah.
And so that walk over the past, it'll be 5 years in December. We just keep reminding ourselves. She was born on the feast of St. Helena of the Cross. She died on the feast of St. John the Beloved. She never left the cross. That is a story only God can write. And when you see it and you recognize it, then you embrace it. We talk about her every day. We have her tennis shoes hanging on a lamp in our house. She is with us. She never leaves us. There'll be scripture that'll come up when we're sitting at Mass. And the woman of great faith, when that scripture comes, that was the one that was read at Courtney's confirmation. And I just have a moment. I'm like, Lord, I am that woman of great faith. I reach out for the healing. God is so good all the time. Even in the darkest moments of desolation, he is present. Even when we don't feel him, like Mother Teresa served for 60 years and she never had any consolation during that time, yet she still stepped out in faith, and she still did what he had asked her to do in those 3 years beforehand, where he had filled her up with everything she would need. God is the reason we're here. We do nothing without him. We are here because we are a breath and a thought of him. And even in the hard, even when he allows that agitation to happen, he still remains. God remains in all things.
I was thinking of, when I was preparing to talk to you about this, and I knew we were going to dig deep into some of these topics, I thought about one of my favorite quotes of all time from St. Jose Maria Escriva about the Christian Revolution. I'm sure you've heard it. But the great Christian Revolution has been to convert pain into fruitful suffering and to turn a bad thing into something good. We have deprived the devil of this weapon, and with it we conquer eternity. And my favorite part is that last little bit, and with it we conquer eternity. It's not just that the struggles and the challenges that Courtney brought could be explained away in some way. It's not that you can just be consoled by God's love through this. That happens. Yeah. But it's through that that salvation can be had, that through that she was an instrument of salvation for you? And is there a greater gift that could have been given?
Redemptive suffering. It's all about redemptive suffering. God doesn't waste one thing ever. He gives us these moments where he offers a sliver of his cross, a sliver. He doesn't need it. He's full and complete on his own. Right. He needs nothing from us, but he wants to enter into a deeper relationship with us. So when we suffer, where do we go? We go to the foot of the cross. We go to him. And so when he allows it, there's a stretching in our spiritual life. There's a challenge almost in who do you say I am?
Yeah.
And so Courtney taught us this whole idea of redemptive suffering, making something bad into something good. If you think of labor, right? You're laboring to bring forth this child. And please, Jesus, at the end of that, you get to hold this beautiful miracle. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And there are reasons for that. And I don't know why the reasons are. I'm not God. I don't see it all, but I trust him that he's got a bigger plan than I could ever imagine. I'm living it. But you think of the end of that laboring, what do you get? This beautiful gift. But you're willing to enter into the laboring because you know there is good at the end of it. So I am willing to enter into the suffering. I wasn't in the beginning. I resisted with everything I had until I couldn't anymore.
Yeah.
And God showed up. And he showed up again and again and again. And that's what redemptive suffering is. It's us saying, I'm going to walk this, Lord. It's going to physically hurt me, emotionally hurt me, but I'm going to offer every single second to you because you hung on the cross for me. You showed me how to suffer. You showed me, you think of St. Veronica as he's walking to his death. She was a woman of compassion. She wiped his face, gave him a moment of rest. You had the women of Jerusalem weeping for him. And he says, don't weep for me. Go and spread my love. Go and love the people as I did. Don't waste your time weeping. Get to work. He had his mother who never left him. Never left him. I mean, I think of her often. The Pietà has become a very special, special work of art for me. I had a moment one time during we do youth ministry at our parish, and during a youth ministry weekend, a retreat weekend, and they had a Pietà in the chapel. And I remember thinking, Mama Mary, why? What? How did you do it? Now, of course, she had no sin, so she had a little bit more of a super highway open to the Lord, than I did. But I'm named for her. My name is Mary Elizabeth. And our pastor, Father Marquette at St. Mary of Sorrows, said one time, you will rise to your name. And I'm thinking, seriously, Mary, that's going to take forever. Well, yeah, it is. It's going to take forever. But my feast day is the Visitation. And what was the Visitation? It was intergenerational ministry happening. Mary had pondered, she had prayed, and then she acted. And she went forth. And that's what God asks of all of us. But she suffered along the way. She watched her baby boy be murdered. And as I was sitting in that chapel, I'm looking at the Pietà, and all he said to me was, everything you did for Courtney, you did for me. Everything you will ever do for her, you will do for me. Everything you will ever do for your husband, you will do for me. For your son, you will do for me. And that's how I try very hard to live my life. And I'm not so good at it sometimes. I'm really not. A lot of people are like, Mary, you're so holy. I'm like, oh, if you just knew what was happening right here. It's not so much. But I try, and I keep giving it over and over and over. And I try and be brave in the scared, because fear is still there. Being brave just means you're going to deal with the fear and still do it. You're going to still do what he's asking you to do, and it's terrifying. I'm sitting in a studio talking to you, Billy, and there's a camera, and there's, my words are being recorded. This is not something I ever thought would be happening.
I'm sure.
Not for 1 second. And yet 5 years later, here I am.
You probably never would imagine you wrote a book.
No, I'm dyslexic. And I can tell you that Sister Vincent de Paul is rolling over in her grave right now going, I taught you diagramming in the 7th and 8th grade. I know what you do to a comma, and it's illegal in the lower 48. So the fact that there is a book that has my name on it is a true miracle of the Lord Jesus Christ. You can ask my husband, that process of 3 months of writing this, he was like, when we turned that in, he just got on his knees. I think he was just like, praise you, Jesus, that we survived this.
It's Courtney's first miracle.
Exactly. It's her first. Oh, she's
Send
had
it to
many.
Rome.
That's right. There you go. Somebody asked me one time, Mary, are they going to open a cause for her? And I'm thinking, pray for a miracle. That's the only way that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And she's a beautiful intercessor. She loves practical things. Like she's big on sewer systems, like plumbing, cars, medical bills. She's really good on that. She's excellent in parking spots. You know, like I need that. That just happened to me in Houston. We had 4 spots to choose from. And I was like, Courtney, we just need one by the door because we had all these books to bring in and things. And literally this woman just pulled out and it was right there. I'm like, thank you, girl. You're good.
She
Thanks.
saved it for
Mama
you.
says that. Yeah. So, I mean, she's very practical because her life was very practical.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when we were going through those 3 months, like we had a major plumbing issue. We had no water for 5 days and you have a critically ill child. I mean, it was just like the devil was all over it. And yet we had people praying for us. We had people walking with us financially. We had people just showing up left and right. There were love bombs. There was this one day, the UPS man, his name was Ralph. It's a great UPS man name, but Ralph, the UPS man, showed up and half of his truck were gifts for Courtney. Good pajamas, warm blankets, frozen food. You know, it was just, God just loved us. And so now, because we were loved so well and our tank was filled so much, now we go out and we love others.
For those listening, believe it or not, this is not the whole story. There's more to it, and the book has it. So how do they find out more about you, kind of follow your blog, those kinds of things, but also where do they get the book?
Well, everything can be found at marylenaburg.com. So on the sidebar, you can get the book. There's a T-shirt that says "Be Brave and the Scared." You know, we got merch.
All right, there we go.
And you can. I travel internationally now, which is kind of cool.
That is great.
It is. I'll be in Toronto in October and Rome in November, which is pretty spectacular.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Speaking to some military wives overseas, which will be awesome. But I travel all over the place. We'll be in Emerson, New Jersey next Friday night. Fort Bragg in June. So you can find all of that on my website. Instagram is my social handle that I love, and I interact quite a bit. Thank you. So
it's not all selfies,
no,
you know.
It's not. No, we have a lot of fun on Instagram. If you follow me at all at Mary Lenaburg, you'll see recently the whole alligator incident. No, Mary has not eaten alligator yet, but I see it in my future. I don't think I will be able to avoid it. But things like we just have fun, you know, and it's all about loving one another, building up community. I'm in women's ministry. There can be kind of like, this pile is my pile, this pile is your pile. I don't believe in piles. It is the kingdom of God, and we build it all together. So marylenaburg.com. Mary Lenaburg is my handle across all social media. I have a Facebook page. I'm happy to go wherever God leads me to go.
And Mary's been very, very generous with the diocese, not just in one, thank you for your time to talk to you about the story and to interview you. I know you're very busy. But if anyone wants to win or get a free signed copy of Mary's book, Be Brave and the Scared, go to Arlington Diocese Instagram. You can follow us there. It's Arlington Church. So at Arlington Church. Diocese was too long. We were one character too long. So our Twitter and our Instagram is Arlington Church. You can also follow us on Facebook. And this week, you can see on those two on Facebook and Instagram how you can win a copy of the book. It's signed. Mary, you've been very generous with us. I'm so grateful.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's such a privilege. Are you kidding me? There's a book with my name on it. Who wants it?
So
give it to all the people.
Here's another thought. So you can win a free copy, but buy one. If you know someone going through something
Amazon.com,
tough, send it to somebody.
Barnes
Gift it
Noble.
to somebody. It's, the summertime. Someone's compiling a reading list, add this to it. Add this to your own. But, if you know somebody that's going through something or is really struggling in some way, this book's going to be very, very helpful. Because really you impart a lot of wisdom just in this half an hour that we've been talking. It's a universal. But you've got a lot in the book that will heal a lot of people, undoubtedly. And that's why you're being asked to speak all over the place.
It's a good thing. I mean, it really is a universal message on control, on suffering, on forgiveness, on redemption, on beauty rising from the ashes, on surviving something that was truly traumatic and being able to rise up with the Lord by your side and go and serve some more. So you can buy the book wherever books are sold. I love it that you ask for it to be at your local library, because that way more people can read it that might not be able to afford it. And, just pass it on.
It's good evangelization. information too. So again, the book is Be Brave and the Scared. Go to Mary Lenaburg. Lenaburg is Lenaburg. Lenaburg.
Yes, sir.
I think I'm dyslexic too. But, .com?
Yes.
.com to learn more about Mary, to get the book, and go to Arlington Church on Instagram and go to Arlington Diocese on Facebook to learn how you can win a signed copy of the book. Mary, thank you for everything.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight. I can't believe it's happening, but yay, God.
God bless.
Thank you for listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that will inspire, educate, and inform you about the Catholic faith in our diocesan community.